Alright guys, today we're going to look a little bit more into heredity and genetics, and then by the end of the class period, hopefully you'll begin working on some Punnett squares, and then we'll go from there. So the first thing that we want to look at is basically how this whole thing started with heredity, and it really stemmed from a guy named Gregor Mendel. He took care of a garden in a Central European monastery, and those experiments in that garden helped to revolutionize the study of heredity. Before we get started, heredity is the passing of physical characteristics from parents to offspring. That's what we've been introducing the past couple weeks. We'll get into that definition a little bit more later, but for now we're going to actually begin by looking at some of Mendel's experiments. Mendel wondered why different pea plants had different characteristics. Some plants grew tall while others were short. Some plants produced green seeds while others had yellow seeds. Each different form of a characteristic, such as stem height or seed color, is called the trait. You all have traits that are specific to you, and that's another thing that we're going to get in later when we look at traits specific to us as human beings. He observed that these pea plant traits were often similar to those of their parents. So just like a lot of you have brown hair and your parents have brown hair, or you may have green eyes and your parents have green eyes, he saw that connection with pea plants as well. However, he noticed, and just like we've noticed before, sometimes you have traits that your parents don't have. This example is kind of shown above. So what Mendel did was he took a tall pea plant and a short pea plant, and he crossed them. So you can see tall here, short here. The result of this were two tall plants. So even though there was a short plant mixed, none of the results were short. It seemed as though the shortness trait had disappeared. Once those plants were full grown, he allowed them to self-pollinate. Okay? Once that happened, you'll see in this bottom section, the new plants that appeared, we now saw the reappearance of the short plant. So it seemed to totally skip a generation. From here, Mendel reached several conclusions on the basis of his experimental results. These factors and characteristics are things that we're going to talk about throughout the rest of this presentation. Alright, at this time you should see this information that's on your screen on the right-hand side of the notes that you have on your desk. What you're going to want to do is you're going to want to fill in the blanks on your notes with the red words that are on the screen. So go ahead, pause the video, fill in your notes, and then we'll get started again. So these are the three things that we've learned from Mendel. The first one is that we're saying the inheritance of each trait, so the stem height, the pod color, the seed shape, these are all determined by genes or genetic information, and that basically controls the inheritance of these traits. The second one that we learned is that the factors that control these traits exist in pairs. So basically you get a female parent contribution and you get a male parent contribution, and both of those help to determine those traits that you get. Finally, the last thing that we look at is that one factor in a pair can mask or hide the other factor. So for example, the tallness factor can completely overlook the shortness factor, and they may skip generations. So, just because your parents had brown hair, there's a good chance that you and your siblings don't, but in the future, your kids could. So that's something we'll look at throughout this presentation, but that was one of the things that we learned from Mendel and his pea pod or pea plant experiments. So as we move into the next part of this section, this picture is a good example of what we were talking about on the last slide, for the simple fact that you can have a parent have qualities or traits that the children do not possess. It does not mean that all of these puppies are not related. It just simply means that something went on genetically that caused it to skip this generation. So we'll look at that when we look at Punnett squares. It's a little bit easier to understand. But big question here. Why don't you look like a rhinoceros? Well, you're going to answer this question in just a minute, but what it says is what or who determines if you have blonde hair, green eyes, tall or short, if you're left-handed, right-handed, or if you might be susceptible to skin cancer later in life. So who ultimately makes that decision? Okay, you're going to have a minute to think, and then you're going to answer that question. All right, well, hopefully you answered your parents. Your parents are the ones that help to determine your hair color, eye color, your height, and all of the other information, genetic information about you. You actually get half of your genetic information from your mom and half of your genetic information from your dad. The next couple slides will kind of look to see how that happens. All right, here you're going to see some red words. These are the words that you're going to want to fill in on your notes. So go ahead, pause the video, take a second, and fill in the blanks on your notes. All right, in this section there are a lot of vocabulary words, so it's going to be important that you take the time to really get to understand what these words mean. First two that we're going to look at are genetics and heredity. A lot of times people think these are the same thing, but they're still a little bit different. Genetics is the study of heredity. Okay, so it's the whole process of studying and understanding this down here. Okay, and heredity is just the passing on of traits from parents to offspring. And those traits are some that we've looked at as far as height, eye color, hair color. And those traits are getting passed from your parents to you. And remember on the last slide we said you get half from mom, and then you get half from your dad. Let's start this slide by going ahead and recording your notes. So everywhere that you see these red words is words that you are going to want to fill in onto your notes page in those blank spots. So once again, pause the video, take a second, fill in your notes, and then resume the video when you're ready. Okay, here are some more vocabulary words that we're going to work on. The first two we're going to look at are characteristics and traits. So characteristics are just the different features that an organism has. So again, once again, the hair color, the eye color, your blood type, all of those features that make you up as an organism, those are characteristics. Traits are a little bit different. These are the different possible types. So you might have red hair, like Noah over there on the right, or you might have blonde hair. You could have green eyes, you could have blue eyes. So traits are more so the different types of forms that you can possibly have. Characteristics are the different types of features. So hair color, eye color, blood type. Today, scientists use the word gene for the factors that control a trait. Alleles, on the other hand, are the different forms of a gene. The gene that controls stem height in peas, for example, has one allele for tall stems and one allele for short stems. Each pea plant inherits two alleles from its parents, one allele from the egg and the other allele from the sperm. A pea plant may inherit two alleles for tall stems, two alleles for short stems, or one of each. This is something we'll look at again when we get into the Punnett squares. You'll actually be able to see that a little bit better. Okay, but the first thing we have to understand is that the genes are the ones that control your traits. So over here on the left-hand side, we have a couple examples, or one example. And that's dominant hand, which meaning, the hand you're most likely to use. A lot of people think of it as the hand you write with. And then we have an example of being right-handed. So we want to realize which one is the gene and which one would be the trait. Okay, so take a second, see if you know that, and then we'll go over it. Okay, hopefully you saw that your dominant hand would be the gene, and right-handed is the trait. Okay, so the gene, dominant hand, is like the characteristic above. It's a feature that an organism has. The trait, however, is the form of that gene. So you could either be right-handed, left-handed, or I guess even ambidextrous. Okay, so gene controls traits. Alright, so just as we mentioned on the previous couple slides, we have to keep in mind that you're getting half of your traits from your mom and half of the traits from your dad. Those alleles are the different forms of the genes. So once again, you get one from each parent, meaning you get one from the egg and one from the sperm. So you might get that right-handed ability from your mom and the right-handed ability from your dad. So you get one from each parent, meaning you have two total alleles. Okay. Some of these traits we inherit show up and some we don't. So just as we talked before, it's possible mom has blonde hair and dad has brown hair and you have brown hair. It's possible that, both your parents have brown hair and you have blonde hair. So some of those scenarios are what we're going to look at and see why it is that it happens. Okay, so let's look to see why sometimes these traits show up and sometimes they don't. Well, we have two different kinds, and they're dominant and recessive. You're going to see right now that these words are in red, so go ahead, pause the video, take a minute, fill them in on your notes, and then go ahead and resume the video when you're ready. Okay, the first one we're going to look at are dominant traits. Dominant traits always show up whenever they are present. They are always shown with capital letters. So in this case over here, we have an uppercase D, uppercase D. That represents a dominant trait. This is also an example of a pure trait. That simply means that both letters are the same shape. So in this case, they're both uppercase. Recessive traits. These are hidden whenever there's a dominant trait present. So dominant traits always win. Recessive traits get overlooked whenever there's a dominant trait appearing. Recessive traits are shown with two lowercase letters. Once again, also pure because they're both the same. To better understand this, we're going to use two pieces of paper to kind of look at the idea of dominant versus recessive. So let's say over here on the left you have, let's go with the dominant trait of hair color. And let's just say that dominant hair color is brown. And we'll say mom is giving you that trait. Okay. Over here on the right hand side, we have dad is providing you with that recessive trait. Okay, so remember you get one from your mom and one from your dad. Okay, so let's go ahead and look at this. So you get that dominant trait from your mom and you get the recessive trait from your dad. Okay, if you notice, what appears is that dominant trait, that brown hair color. Okay, the only way that we would see that recessive gene is if they were both recessive. So for a second, give me a second here. Okay, I'm back. So the only way that we would see a recessive trait appear is if both mom and dad gave you that recessive trait. So for example, if we take a recessive trait from mom, recessive trait from dad, you're going to notice that the appearance of it is exactly the same as mom's and dad's, whatever that recessive trait was. So maybe, for example, blonde hair. Okay? So dominant trait always wins. If there's no dominant trait appearing, then that's when the recessive one can take place. Okay? So both dominant traits, dominant from mom, dominant from dad equals dominant. One dominant, one recessive equals dominant. Both recessive will equal recessive. So now we're going to look at all of this in some Punnett squares, and hopefully it all begins to tie together for you. Okay, so with this first example, we are going to look at bunnies. So in this circumstance, we have a pure bunny and a hybrid bunny. So what does that mean? Well, right here it says that the black fur is dominant. We discussed earlier that pure meant that you had two dominant alleles, or two recessive alleles, but they're both the same. So in this case, we have a pure black-furred bunny. And we're actually going to say that this over here is mom. Okay. Over on the right-hand side, let's say this is dad, the male bunny. And he's a hybrid. And what the hybrid simply means is he has that dominant allele. So you see the capital B. But he's also a carrier of the recessive trait, which in this case is white fur. So what we're going to look at now on the bottom is called a Punnett square. And what the Punnett square does is it basically combines the alleles of both parents to see what possible options there are for their baby bunnies. So what we're going to do is we're going to fill in the Punnett square. The first thing that you're going to do, the nice part is it doesn't matter whether you put the two alleles on the top or if you put them on the side. So in this case, I'm going to put the moms over on the top. So I'm going to put capital B, capital B. And then over on the left-hand side, I'm going to put the hybrid dad, which was capital B, lowercase b. So now what we want to do is we want to combine these alleles to see, what are the possibilities or what are the chances that their baby bunnies are going to have black fur or white fur. And this is basically how it works. You are going to combine the two alleles in each box. So for this one, we're going to take the B from there, the B from straight above, and we're going to combine them, and we have two capital B's. We're going to do the same for the right-hand box over here. So I'm just simply taking this uppercase B, or capital B, I'm going to add it here, and then I'm going to take the uppercase B from right here, and I'm going to add that in as well. Okay, so we finished the top row. Now on the bottom, we do have a change, and it's now we have a lowercase b. The one thing that you do in a box, if there's ever a capital letter, is you put the capital letter first. So in this case right here, if you look straight above, we have the capital letter B, and we have a lowercase b, and we're going to combine those two in the box. Capital letter goes first, lowercase second. Finally, if we look at the last box, we're going to do the same, lowercase b, uppercase B. When we combine them, uppercase goes first for capital. Okay, and that's your complete Punnett square. Alright, so here are our last two vocabulary words for the day, and that's genotype and phenotype. You're going to go ahead, fill these last two words in on your notes in the blanks. So pause the video, fill in your notes, and then click start when you're ready to go again. Okay, the first one we'll look at is genotype. And these are the actual genes that are inside the organism. So in this example up here we have the pure dominant, which is two capital T's. We have what should be, let me fix this, the hybrid, which is one dominant allele and one recessive allele, or one capital letter, one lowercase letter. And you have the pure recessive, which is two lowercase t's. So these are the actual genes that are inside the organism. So if you remember correctly, our Punnett square for our two bunnies on the previous slide ended up looking like this. So if we looked at this scenario and were asked what was the genotype, your answer would be pure, dominant or black fur. You have two chances of that. And then you have two chances of being a hybrid. Okay? You could also write it as 50% chance, okay, because the whole thing equals 100. And you have a 50% chance of being a hybrid. Okay, so if these two bunnies were to have a baby, this would be the options. Okay, so there is no chance of these two parents having a white furred or a white fur baby bunny. Okay, the next one we're going to look at, the next vocab word we're going to look at is phenotype. Phenotype is the physical expression of the genes, so what it looks like. So in our case right here, we're going to say the phenotype. Oops. So if we look at this, we're saying 50% pure dominant, 50% hybrid. Well, if we remember, we said dominant traits are always going to win. So if you're looking at capital B, that bunny is going to have black fur. Capital B, lowercase b, that bunny is going to have black fur. Because again, the capital B was the dominant trait, and that meant it had black fur. So in this case, it is a 100% chance that the bunny is going to have black fur. And that's the phenotype. When you see phenotype, think physical. So the physical characteristics. What is it going to look like? So genotype, the genes, the actual genes inside. The physical type is going to be the phenotype is going to be the physical appearance of the animal. Okay, on the back of your notes page, you're going to see that you have quite a bit of blank space there on the bottom. We're going to do a couple Punnett squares examples, and that's the area that I'd like you to record or to write down these Punnett squares so that you have them in your notes. So the first one I'd like you to write down, and just make sure you give yourself enough room for about 2 or 3 of these. You're going to go ahead and draw a Punnett square. And this first one, we're simply going to complete the same exact one that we just did, but that way it's in your notes. So a pure Blackford bunny with a hybrid. If it's helpful for you, or if you think that, you might forget, you might want to draw the arrows in to show where you're getting the combinations from. That's totally up to you if that's something that you need. But at this time, you might want to pause the video so that you can get this all written down on your paper and then start it up again when you're ready. Okay, the next example I'd like you to try, go ahead and set up a brand new Punnett square. Okay, and in this case, we're going to say that both parents are hybrid. So we're going to do a hybrid mom and a hybrid dad. Okay, black is still going to be the dominant allele, or the dominant trait. So again, remember, it does not matter if you put mom, on the top of the Punnett square or on the side. So go ahead and do that. And in this case, they're both the same, so it really doesn't matter. Okay. All right, and then you're going to go ahead and combine. So again, remember, you're taking, one from the left of the square, one from the top of the square, combining them. So in this case, we have two capital B's. Again, capital B goes down here, lowercase here, always putting capital first. Lowercase here, uppercase here, uppercase first. And then your very last one, we have a lowercase and a lowercase that we're going to combine. Okay, so what does this even mean? Well, we said there's two things, a genotype and a phenotype, and those are two things that you're going to have to fill in after every Punnett square. So it's important that you know the difference between these words. Remember, genotype are the genes that the organism has inside of them. So in this case, we have a 25% chance that it can be pure, dominant. You have a 50%, 2 out of 4, that it's going to be a hybrid. And you have a 25% in this case that you're going to have a bunny with both recessive traits, which means this bunny could be white. Finally, phenotype. Remember, physical characteristics. What's it going to look like? You can do the same thing as above, only now instead of the genes, you're filling in the physical appearance. So we're going to combine these because if we remember, that one capital B, that one dominant trait is going to win. So that means this whole area right here, all of this percentage is going to be a Blackford bunny. So if we combine that, we have 75% chance the bunny is going to have black fur. And we have a 25% chance that the bunny is going to have white fur. So this is one of those scenarios where you may have two parents with brown hair and baby has blonde hair. It's simply because it had both of the recessive genes from the hybrid parents. Okay, so I'm hoping this all is starting to make a little bit more sense. The Punnett squares we'll have a lot of practice with, and then those of you that are starting to understand it are going to be able to go a little bit ahead and be able to do some that are a little bit more complicated. And those of you that are having a hard time, we'll sit back and work with Mr. Vaughn and myself. Okay? All right, you're going to want to look up on the board and see what the next step is that you need to complete.